They couldn't beat him with bullets. They couldn't silence him with media. So they turned to something colder, slower, deadlier. Sanctions. Reserves frozen. Trade routes stalled. External credit blocked without a single headline. But Traoré had seen it coming. When they stop your breath, he said, build your own lungs. Subscribe now, because this isn't warfare. It's financial assassination. Comment. Can a revolution survive when the world stops feeding it? The markets didn't crash. They went silent. Empty shelves. Long queues. Radios looping old news, pretending nothing had changed. But the people felt it. They always do. In one village, a grandmother traded her wedding ring for a sack of rice. In the capital, the elite stocked up on canned imports, just in case. The sanctions weren't visible, but they were everywhere. Like carbon monoxide, choking without color, smell, or sound. And yet, Traoré didn't flinch. Not yet. The headlines came next. Burkina Faso regime collapses economy. Pan-African crypto plan sparks famine fears. CNN, Reuters, even Al Jazeera, all quoting anonymous diplomats, all framing one man. At the UN, a West African president publicly condemned Traoré. He called Afripay an irresponsible experiment. The camera zoomed in on him. Traoré didn't blink. He wrote 2 words on his notepad and slid it to his aide. Sanction them. Internal pressure boiled. His finance minister resigned. We need relief, he said, not resistance. Civil society leaders begged for negotiations. Foreign NGOs suspended their operations. But Traoré gathered his war cabinet and said, they can freeze our accounts, but not our imagination. That night, the power grid went down in 5 provinces. Sabotage or coincidence? No one claimed it, but in the dark, cell phones lit up. And a single hashtag began trending underground. Hashtag oxygen from ashes. Traoré ordered something no African leader had done before. A nationwide economic lockdown, not to restrict the people, but to protect them. No imports, no exports, only internal supply chains. If they cut us off, he said, we cut out the middlemen. Farmers began trading directly with cooperatives. Local engineers reactivated dormant solar hubs. The black market collapsed because no one needed it anymore. What began as suffocation started to look like rebirth. A discreet IMF memo leaked online. It outlined plans to destabilize Burkina's banking sector via secondary asset restrictions. Translation? Block third-party nations from trading with them. Within days, even friendly African banks froze connections. Ivory Coast, Senegal, Ghana. One headline whispered, Africa isolates its radical child. But Traoré remained calm. They don't fear our economy, he said. They fear the idea that we could survive without them. Late one night, a senior aide approached Traoré with a proposal. A secret negotiation, backdoor talks with France to lift the sanctions. Just for 6 months, he said. We rebuild trust. Then reboot Afripay. Traoré looked at him for 10 silent seconds. Then he smiled. You rebuild trust the way slaves rebuild chains, he replied. The aide resigned at dawn. But Traoré didn't erase the proposal. He published it anonymously with one title, How Empires Whisper. Foreign media declared Burkina's currency dead. But something strange happened. In rural markets, Afripay held firm. Farmers, weavers, blacksmiths, they trusted the system more than foreign cash. It wasn't backed by gold. It was backed by need. A need to resist. A need to exchange. A need to say, we still exist. That made Afripay more than currency. It became a fingerprint. Proof that Burkina's soul couldn't be sanctioned. Across West Africa, youth movements lit up the networks. Podcasts, underground forums, street art. In Lagos, someone painted, "If the CFA franc is money, then Afripay is breath." In Nairobi, one coin, one voice, no chains. But that voice echoed into Brussels. And there, in closed-door meetings, a new plan was hatched. Not just sanctions, not just sabotage. Targeted digital isolation. A new weapon, one that strikes without ever crossing a border. It started subtly. Messaging apps began failing. Currency exchanges showed blank rates. Transaction validators timed out. Afripay wasn't hacked. It was digitally exiled. But in this silence, Traoré spoke louder. They weaponized connection. We will weaponize locality. Subscribe now, because this isn't warfare. It's financial assassination. Comment. Can a revolution survive when the world stops feeding it? By week 3, Afripay was choking. Validators were down. Foreign IP bans. Even pro-revolution coders couldn't maintain the network. For the first time, Traoré considered a rollback. But the decision never reached his lips. Because just before dawn, a whisper came from the underground. We've built something new. A peer-to-peer mesh, untraceable and off-grid. No satellites. No central servers. They called it AfriNet. AfriNet wasn't polished. It was rough, clunky, unstable, and brilliant. Devices shared bandwidth in waves. SMS relays carried encrypted transaction strings. People called it Bluetooth banking. In villages with no electricity, teams charged phones via bike dynamos just to keep AfriNet breathing. And in Ouagadougou, Traoré made his choice clear. We don't just survive sanctions. We learn to live beyond them. Europe watched, stunned. They had expected collapse. What they got was adaptation. One EU official reportedly muttered, "It's like they're building routes where we left cracks." The World Bank issued a statement, but Burkina's financial experiment presents unforeseen complications. But by now, AfriNet wasn't just a fix. It was a philosophy. If they can see it, they can stop it. If they can't see it, we can grow it. Not everyone cheered. Internal actors, once silent, began pushing back. A former telecom executive accused Traoré of digital anarchy. A leaked letter from a West African leader warned, "Your mesh spreads like wildfire. If we burn too, we'll blame you." But Traoré didn't retract. "If your house is made of dry wood," he said, "maybe you should have watered your roots." Burkina was no longer asking for room. It was taking space. The G7 met behind closed doors. One agenda item, the AfriNet risk, their conclusion? Decentralization cannot be allowed to scale in the global south. A strategy was approved. Cyber espionage, doxing, even infiltration of the AfriNet nodes. But Traoré's team had a message waiting for them on the dark web. "We expected you. We built in shadows. Subscribe now, because this isn't warfare. It's financial assassination." Comment. Can a revolution survive when the world stops feeding it? As AfriNet spread, something shifted. It was no longer Traoré's project. It became the people's platform. Women in rural towns began issuing microloans. Artists minted revolution credits as digital art. Midwives tracked births with blockchain timestamps. It was messy. It was miraculous. The state wasn't giving permission. It was catching up. For the first time in modern African history, the people led, and the government followed. One night, Traoré stood before the nation. No podium, no flag. Just firelight and silence. "They sanctioned our past," he said, "but we just drafted our future." Then he held up a tablet. On it, Burkina Faso's first digital constitution. Voted line by line through AfriNet. Rights, resources, representation. All logged, all transparent. The revolution had outgrown revolt. It had become infrastructure. The backlash was brutal. A cyber attack swept through AfriNet nodes in the south. Electricity grids failed. Rumors of Western intelligence fingerprints spread fast. Yet the system held. Why? Because it no longer needed one server or one man. In decentralization, they had found invincibility, a quiet victory. Not the kind that gets headlines, but the kind that survives fire. At the UN, a delegate muttered. He turned sanctions into code. Another asked, what if every African nation tries this? They didn't say it aloud, but the fear was clear. What if freedom becomes a formula? Subscribe now, because this isn't warfare. It's financial assassination. Comment. Can a revolution survive when the world stops feeding it? In the end, Traoré walked alone through a village that once begged for rice. Now, it traded in crops, data, and dignity. A boy handed him a solar-powered device and said, "This helps my grandmother sell her tea." That's when Traoré smiled. Not because the system worked, but because the people knew it was theirs. So now the question is, would your country survive if it were cut off from the world? Or better yet, could it thrive?